Want to know how to get better backgrounds? Ever wonder how the pros seem to do it with ease while you struggle? Ever wonder how some photographers get great backgrounds even when using slower lenses? Well, I'm going to spill the beans. Wait till you see this. Steve from Backcountry Gallery here, and today let's explore 5 techniques to enhance the backgrounds in your wildlife photos. The 4th tip is definitely my favorite, and the 5th is definitely going to stir up some controversy for some people. Before we begin though, this video assumes that you, like me, prefer backgrounds that are out of focus to some degree to help emphasize our subject. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. Sometimes, as you see here, a sharper, well-defined background works great. However, this video is for the 90 to 95% of the time when you'd prefer a background that's either giving the viewer a nice notion of the habitat without screaming for attention, or maybe one that's completely out of focus. And come to think of it, I'm kind of curious, what do you think? After the video, let me know in the comments how much detail you like to see in your backgrounds and why. Let's dive in. Oh, and as we go through these tips, remember that while they are effective on their own, combining them takes it to the next level. Number 1, shoot wide open. I'll start with the easy and obvious one, and that is to shoot wide open to keep the depth of field as shallow as possible, which also helps to tame the background. I think the biggest mistake I see here isn't so much that people don't know to open up their lens, but rather they accidentally stop down and they don't realize it. Remember, every time you bring the camera to your eye, double check your essential settings, and in this case, triple check to make sure that lens is still wide open. Oh, and what if you don't have fast glass and you just can't stop down that much? Not to worry, the next few tips have your back. Number 2, fill the frame. This tip and the next one kind of go hand in hand, but we'll start here. As you know, the farther you are from your subject, the deeper the depth of field. This results in less background blur, and less background blur results in, you guessed it, a busier and more disturbed looking background. In fact, let me demonstrate this for you. So we have our little subject here, just a tripod head, and we have 3 different images with different looking backgrounds, although the tripod head is the same size. The difference is how much I cropped. So let's go to the Develop module. This is the first one, and this is not cropped at all. The next one, as you can see, is about a DX APS-C size crop, and this one is an even heavier crop. And I know people say, oh, I would never crop that much, but I see people crop this much all the time. But look at the impact that that crop has. And by the way, this is a Nikon 400 f4.5, so it's not like some big exotic lens or something, just a pretty typical normal lens. And here is the full frame version. The background looks really nice. When we go to the DX APS-C crop, the background's not bad, but you can see a significant difference between this one here, the full frame, and the DX APS-C crop. So let's compare the full frame to the heavy crop. Here's the full frame, looks really nice still. And here is the heavy crop, and that does not look nice at all. That background is very busy, very disturbed. It just does not compare to what we see here. And the only difference here was the distance between the lens and the subject. 3, use a longer lens. The next tip is to use longer glass when you can. Just because you can get close enough to use a 200mm or 300mm lens, that doesn't mean it's always a good idea. Although technically, depth of field is roughly the same for any focal length if the subject itself is the same size in the frame. The effects on the background area are profound. Longer lenses see less of the background and magnify it more, resulting in smoother, softer looking backgrounds. In fact, look at these 2 shots. The one on the left is at 200mm and the one on the right is at 600mm, and both were shot at 5.6. Both subjects are the same size in the frame and both have the same depth of field as a result. However, check out the difference in the backgrounds. If this were a real subject and I wanted a softer background, using the longer focal length there is an absolute no-brainer. The takeaway here is that f-stop for f-stop, longer focal lengths have a definite advantage when trying to add some blur to our backgrounds. 4, optimize subject to background distance. Finally, my favorite and most potent tool, I think, subject to background distance. The closer your subject is to the background, the more detail you're going to see in that background. Conversely, the farther away the background is from your subject, the less detail you're going to see, and the softer it's going to look in your photo. In fact, even if you follow all the tips we've gone through so far, but have a very close background, you're still not going to be able to throw it out of focus to any meaningful degree. Just look at this photo. It's full frame, it's wide open, and with a long focal length lens, and yet the background is still too sharp, too busy, and too distracting. Whenever I spot a potential subject, the very first thing I do is to look around at my background options before I position myself. Often, just by moving left, right, up, down, or even forward or backward, we can secure a better background for our image. Sure, sometimes we're stuck, I'll admit that, but more often than not, you really can pull something out by just moving a little bit. Take this chipmunk, for instance. When I first saw him, he had a mess of sticks behind him to the left and outside of the frame. When I approached, I maneuvered so that I had the more distant, colorful leaves behind him, and the truth is, I do this for at least 90% of my shots. In almost every case, after I spot my target, I maneuver around a little bit for a better background to tell the story I want. I almost never take it as I first see it. 5. Fix it in post. Finally, we have the controversial tip. Blur out your background in Lightroom or Photoshop. Now, some purists will disagree with this, but I think that this is a tool you should consider if you use it carefully. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether background blurring is going over the line or not. Let me know in the comments. My advice, if you're going to use background blurring in post, do it carefully and keep it realistic. Often I see things like this photo where it's obvious heavy blurring was used, and to me, this just doesn't look realistic. Although I don't use software blurring very often, when I do use it, I find I get the best results when I have a background that's close to what I want but just needs a little push to make it better, such as with this photo right here. I find that if you use it sparingly and not overdo it, it can really enhance the story you want to tell without making the image look fake. As a piece of bonus advice, keep in mind that as you blur a background, you also take out any noise that's present. And although that sounds like a good thing and can be useful, it can also contribute to making the out of focus area look too smooth and a little bit fake. I often add just a few points of grain back into the defocused area using masks in Lightroom to make it look a little bit more authentic. It doesn't take much. You may not even notice it when the image is zoomed out, but it does tie those defocused areas in with the rest. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how much background blur you prefer for your wildlife work, and if you think blurring out backgrounds is taking it a step too far. Also, be sure to stop by the site and check out all of my educational materials. I pour everything I know into those books and video workshops, and every day, thousands of people use the techniques and advice to get more wall hangers. Check it out. I know you're going to love it, and it doesn't cost you a dime to look. As always, thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.